Howdy, it's Kyle taking a look at U.S. population data midway between two censuses to see where we stand population-wise. Back in 2020, we had the census, but then right afterward, there was a pandemic, so we had a bit of a population shift. Many folks with jobs where they can just work from anywhere moved to a different city or state as a result, but I think most of the people that had the opportunity to move because of the pandemic probably already did, and most of the dust has settled. So what I want to do here is take a look at where we stand right now after several years after the pandemic to see where the geographic distribution of population has changed in the U.S. in the past few years. Before I start, I want to remind you about Mirway Maps. In all my videos, there's a link in the description to where you can get a coupon code for 12% off your order. They make really good physical geography maps, topo maps, raised relief, really good stuff. Check out the website for some beautiful maps. I'm going to start by taking a look at the states. The dark green are the states that have grown in population by more than 2% since the 2020 census. The medium green are the ones that have grown between 1 and 2%, and the light green, kind of the yellowish green ones, have grown but by less than 1%. The purple ones are the ones that have lost population since the 2020 census. The lightest purple ones have lost population but just under 1%, so slight loss. The medium purple ones have lost between 1 and 2%, and the dark purple is lost over 2%, and there is only one dark purple on the map. That is New York, which has actually lost 3% of its population since the 2020 census. So I'll start right there with New York being the state that's lost the most population since 2000. A decrease of 3% is pretty large. So the next three states are Illinois, Louisiana, and West Virginia that have lost 2%, 1.8, and 1.7% respectively. So for New York to have lost 3.1%, it's quite a bit more than any of the other states. And a good chunk of that loss is in the New York City metropolitan area. There has been some population loss in the upstate and western part of the state as well, but most of the people do live in the metro area of the city, and that's where most of the population loss has been. For the other states in that medium purple range, California and Hawaii have both lost about 1.4% of its population. 24 is still expected to be a year of population loss for California, but at a lower rate than the previous years. And we'll have to see about Hawaii. A lot of that population loss was due to the wildfires in Maui. For the states shaded pink, such as Oregon, New Mexico, and Michigan, these states have lost population but by a very small amount. And in fact, in the case of Michigan and Ohio, the population has actually gone up in the past year, but it's still an overall decrease since the last census. And then for Oregon, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, the population is about the same as it was in 2020, although there has been a slight loss since. And now for the ones that have grown in population, the ones that are that light green, that yellowish green, are the ones that have grown but by a very small amount. All of these states have seen population growth less than 1%, but a few of them, Alaska, Kansas, Maryland, and New Jersey, the population is essentially the same as it was at the census, just a few extra people added. So overall, there are 22 states where the population growth or loss has been less than 1%, so the states are either light pink or light green. And it's really interesting to note that other than South Dakota and Illinois, the entire Midwest has seen either slight population decrease or increase. And like I had mentioned before, Michigan and Ohio have seen a slight population increase in the past year. So my hypothesis on this is that at the beginning of this decade, there was still a little bit of a getting away from the Rust Belt mentality. But in the past couple of years, with so many of the disasters and heat waves and things in the South and Southeast, Southwest, that I think more people are taking a look at the Midwest as maybe a better place to live. Cold winters, maybe higher taxes, but maybe a little bit safer as well. I have no numbers to back that up. That's just my hypothesis, but I am going on record saying that 2030 will be the first census since 1950 where Detroit has gained population. So we'll have to see if that trend continues, but overall the Midwest has seen relatively flat population growth since the census. And then go to the Northeast. Between the 6 New England states and New York, you have 5 of the 6 colors in the legend represented. Again, New York with that 3% population decrease, but surprisingly, Maine has seen a 2.5% population increase. New Hampshire is that medium green, but at 1.8% is pretty close to being dark green. Whereas Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island are all pretty much flatline population growth since the census. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, a bunch of New Yorkers moving to Maine, but either way, Maine is the big winner in terms of population growth in the Northeast. So now going to the medium green ones like Washington, Wyoming, and Colorado, these are states where the population has grown between 1 and 2%. There are only 7 states in this category, so it's pretty interesting in that there are more states that have grown by 2% or more than ones that have grown between 1 and 2%. You'll see down in Arkansas and Alabama, two of the medium green states. Arkansas would be a pink state if it weren't for the two northwesternmost counties in the state. So that overall region has been seeing a decrease in population, but that big growth in northwest Arkansas and northeast Alabama has led to the overall state population going up a little bit. The rest of the medium green, Washington, Wyoming, Colorado, and Virginia, has seen again 1 to 2% population growth. And that's pretty good relative to what's going on right now, but between 2010 and 2020, population growth in that range would have been below average. The country as a whole hasn't been growing very much, so these states would have normally been low population growth, but now it's above average. And even when you get to the dark green states, some of these states wouldn't have had high population growth based on the previous decade standards. And in fact, only 7 states have had a population growth greater than 4% since the census. That is pretty good growth, but that's only slightly above average than what we were seeing in the previous decade. So you can see a general trend of where the big population growth has been: the interior west, Texas, and the Atlantic southeast. So the population growth in the South isn't the entire South, but it is those Atlantic states and eastern Tennessee that's really growing a lot. And then to the southern plains, Texas has grown more than Oklahoma, but both have seen pretty good growth. And you get to the interior west, other than Arizona, there aren't many people there, so it's a lot of dark green on the map, but it doesn't really cover a huge population. So there has been a lot of population growth in those interior western states, but it kind of gives a false impression that the country as a whole has been growing quite a bit because you see so much dark green on there, but the country as a whole hasn't really been growing that much. Since the census, the population has only grown by 1% nationwide. That's very low. Between 2010 and 2020, the population grew by 7.3%. And there have been 3 major reasons for the slow population growth. 1, people just aren't having as many kids as they used to. 2, fewer immigrants have come to the U.S. in the past few years. And 3, 1 million people died from COVID. And yes, many of the people that died from COVID were already elderly and may have died by now anyway, but still a lot of people died from COVID. With the economy slumping during the pandemic, there was fewer economic activity, fewer things were going on, fewer jobs, fewer immigrants coming in to do some jobs. And with many folks being laid off, money getting tight, fewer people could afford to have kids. I think in the next decade or 2, we're going to see the U.S. population peak and start to decline a little bit like you're seeing in Europe and Japan. A lot of folks will cheer that, yay, fewer people, but that isn't good for your population if it's going down. Nobody will say they want 10% population growth, but no economist will say they want 1% population decrease. So for a national population, 2030 will probably be higher than 2020, but will 2040 be higher than 2030? Maybe not. So let's take a look at the overall general trend of the states and where people are moving. I think in 2020 and 21, right in the heart of the pandemic, many folks that had the ability to move somewhere else because they had a job where they can work from home did so. And the states that people largely moved to were the ones that have 0 state income tax. You figure if you're somebody that can work from wherever, you're going to make the same wage no matter where you are. You might as well be in a state with 0 income tax. So you saw a lot of people moving to Nevada, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and South Dakota. Those are some of the biggest winners early on in this decade. But it certainly isn't just taxes, because Idaho, Montana, Utah, and South Carolina have all grown quite a bit, and those are fairly high tax states. Arkansas has seen less growth, but that's one of the highest tax states in the country. At the other end, West Virginia is a very low tax state, and it's been losing population for quite a bit. So it isn't just the taxes, but that has been a huge part of it, again, with so many people that can work from anywhere going to the 0 state tax states. And at the other end, the highest tax states in the country are basically all pink and purple. Illinois is widely known as the highest tax state in the Midwest, and look at that, it's the one that's losing the most people. Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa are all relatively high tax with some slight population growth. New Hampshire is by far the lowest tax state in the Northeast and the second in population growth, so that makes sense. And don't forget little old Delaware, a lot of population growth there. It does have high income tax, but no sales tax, which is very similar to Oregon. There's been a slight population decrease in Oregon in the past couple of years. But what we have seen also in the past couple of years is some of those 0 income tax states' populations not grow as much as they did at the beginning of this decade. And we'll have to see what this run of hurricanes this year is going to do to the population of Florida. It's probably be like it was in 2004 and 2005. There was a temporary reduction in population, but people have short-term memories and they'll be right back. But I think the property insurance rates in Florida might keep people from being able to move back there. I don't think recent disasters in the Carolinas and Georgia and Tennessee are going to have a huge effect on population decrease or increase in the near future. I would certainly expect a blip in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, but only temporarily. I think in the case of California, a lot of people would like to move there, just can't afford to. But as long as the cost of housing along the coast is too expensive for even the upper middle class to afford to buy there, California is going to remain purple on this map. There are 38 cities in the US with a population over 500,000. Of those, 20 of them have gained population and 18 have lost population since 2020. And in general, it's been Sunbelt cities that have been growing a lot. The only Sunbelt cities that have lost population since the census are the Los Angeles metro area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and New Orleans. And New Orleans is by far the metro that's lost the highest percentage of its population since the last census. There's been a decrease of almost 5%. However, the city of San Francisco is the city that's lost the most people. There's been 7% population loss since 2020. And San Diego and Sacramento are the only two big cities in the state that have been growing in population since the census. Now, whereas only 14 of the top 32 cities have been gaining population, 34 of the top 50 metros have been gaining. But I think the cities have a better opportunity to rebound a little more than the rural areas. The main driver of people moving somewhere different is going to be money and jobs, and there aren't many of either in rural areas. But regardless of where you are, one thing remains true. If you're living somewhere where the population is going down, you're complaining. If you're living somewhere where the population is going up, you're complaining. So if you want to move to the state that has the closest population to what it had in 2020, go to Rhode Island. So that was my look at the state of population right now in the US, and I find it very interesting that things have changed so much in just this first half of the decade, with the pandemic affecting so much in the first couple of years. But now that we're a couple of years past it, people are thinking a little bit more differently, maybe more natural disaster oriented, maybe more property insurance oriented. So we'll have to see what will change in the next several years and see where the 2030 census takes us. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography from a nerd. And as always, check out the link in the description for Mirway maps, really beautiful maps on the website, coupon code for a discount in the description. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons, especially Mo B. Thank you very much for the support through the years. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. As always, thank you very much.